The dandy. Seduction was and will always remain the female form of power and warfare. It was originally the antidote to rape and violence. The man who uses this form of power on a woman is in essence turning the game around, employing feminine weapons against her. Without losing his masculine identity, the more subtly feminine he becomes, the more effective the seduction. Do not be one of those who believe that what is most seductive is being devastatingly masculine. The feminine dandy has a much more sinister effect. He lures the woman in with exactly what she wants, a familiar, pleasing, graceful presence. Mirroring feminine psychology, he displays attention to his appearance, sensitivity to detail, a slight coquettishness, but also a hint of male cruelty. Women are narcissists in love with the charms of their own sex. By showing them feminine charm, a man can mesmerize and disarm them, leaving them vulnerable to a bold, masculine move. The feminine dandy can seduce on a mass scale. No single woman really possesses him. He is too elusive, but all can fantasize about doing so. The key is ambiguity. Your sexuality is decidedly heterosexual, but your body and psychology float delightfully back and forth between the two poles. The masculine dandy succeeds by reversing the normal pattern of male superiority in matters of love and seduction. A man's apparent independence, his capacity for detachment, often seems to give him the upper hand in the dynamic between men and women. A purely feminine woman will arouse desire, but is always vulnerable to the man's capricious loss of interest. A purely masculine woman, on the other hand, will not arouse that interest at all. Follow the path of the masculine dandy, however, and you will neutralize all a man's powers. Never give completely of yourself. While you are passionate and sexual, always retain an air of independence and self-possession. You might move on to the next man, or so he will think. You have other more important matters to concern yourself with, such as your work. Men do not know how to fight women who use their own weapons against them. They are intrigued, aroused, and disarmed. Few men can resist the taboo pleasures offered up to them by the masculine dandy. Many of us today imagine that sexual freedom has progressed in recent years, that everything has changed for better or worse. This is mostly an illusion. A reading of history reveals periods of licentiousness. Imperial Rome, late 17th century England, the floating world of 18th century Japan, far in excess of what we are currently experiencing. Gender roles are certainly changing, but they have changed before. Society is in a state of constant flux, but there is something that does not change. The vast majority of people conform to whatever is normal for the time. They play the role allotted to them. Conformity is a constant because humans are social creatures who are always imitating one another. At certain points in history, it may be fashionable to be different and rebellious, but if a lot of people are playing that role, there is nothing different or rebellious about it. We should never complain about most people's slavish conformity, however, for it offers untold possibilities of power and seduction to those who are up for a few risks. Dandies have existed in all ages and cultures. Alcibiades in ancient Greece, Korechika in late 10th century Japan, and wherever they have gone, they have thrived on the conformist role-playing of others. The dandy displays a true and radical difference from other people, a difference of appearance and manner. Since most of us are secretly oppressed by our lack of freedom, we are drawn to those who are more fluid and flaunt their difference. Dandies seduce socially as well as sexually. Groups form around them. Their style is wildly imitated. An entire court or crowd will fall in love with them. In adapting the dandy character for your own purposes, remember that the dandy is by nature a rare and beautiful flower. Be different in ways that are both striking and aesthetic, never vulgar. Poke fun at current trends and styles. go in a novel direction, and be supremely uninterested in what anyone else is doing. Most people are insecure. They will wonder what you are up to, and slowly they will come to admire and imitate you because you express yourself with total confidence. The dandy has traditionally been defined by clothing, and certainly most dandies create a unique visual style. Beau Brummel, the most famous dandy of all, would spend hours on his toilette, particularly the inimitably styled knot in his necktie, for which he was famous throughout the early 19th century England. But a dandy style cannot be obvious, for dandies are subtle and never try hard for attention. Attention comes to them. The person whose clothes are flagrantly different has little imagination or taste. Dandies show their difference in the little touches that mark their disdain for convention. Théophile Gautier's red vest, Oscar Wilde's green velvet suit, Andy Warhol's silver wigs. The great English Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli had two magnificent canes, one for morning, one for evening. At noon, he would change canes no matter where he was. The female dandy works similarly. She may adopt male clothing, say, but if she does, a touch here or there will set her truly apart. Remember, there must be a reference point. If your visual style is totally unfamiliar, people will think you at best an obvious attention-getter, at worst, crazy. Instead, create your own fashion sense by adapting and altering prevailing styles to make yourself an object of fascination. Do this right, and you will be wildly imitated. The Count d'Orsay, a great London dandy of the 1830s and 40s, was closely watched by fashionable people. One day, caught in a sudden London rainstorm, he bought a paltruc, a kind of heavy hooded duffel coat off the back of a Dutch sailor. The paltruc immediately became the coat to wear. Having people imitate you, of course, is a sign of your powers of seduction. The nonconformity of dandies, however, goes far beyond appearances. It is an attitude toward life that sets them apart. Adopt that attitude and a circle of followers will form around you. Dandies are supremely impudent. They don't give a damn about other people and never try to please. In the court of Louis XIV, the writer La Bruyere noticed that courtiers who tried hard to please were invariably on the way down. Nothing was more anti-seductive. As Barbé d'Aurevilly wrote, dandies please women by displeasing them. The insolence of the rake is tied up with his desire to conquer a woman. He cares for nothing else. The insolence of the dandy, on the other hand, is aimed at society and its conventions. It is not a woman he cares to conquer, but a whole group, an entire social world. And since people are generally oppressed by the obligation of always being polite and self-sacrificing, they are delighted to spend time around a person who disdains such niceties. Dandies are masters of the art of living. They live for pleasure, not for work. They surround themselves with beautiful objects and eat and drink with the same relish they show for their clothes. This was how the great Roman writer Petronius, author of the Satyricon, was able to seduce the Emperor Nero. Unlike the dull Seneca, the great Stoic thinker and Nero's tutor, Petronius knew how to make every detail of life a grand aesthetic adventure, from a feast to a simple conversation. This is not an attitude you should impose on those around you. You can't make yourself a nuisance, but if you simply seem socially confident and sure of your taste, people will be drawn to you. The key is to make everything an aesthetic choice. Your ability to alleviate boredom by making life an art will make your company highly prized. The opposite sex is a strange country we can never know, and this excites us, creates the proper sexual tension, but it is also a source of annoyance and frustration. Men do not understand how women think, and vice versa. Each tries to make the other act more like a member of their own sex. Dandies may never try to please, but in this one area, they have a pleasing effect. By adopting psychological traits of the opposite sex, they appeal to our inherent narcissism. This kind of mental transvestism, the ability to enter the spirit of the opposite sex, adapt to their way of thinking, mirror their tastes and attitudes, can be a key element in seduction. It is a way of mesmerizing your victim. According to Freud, the human libido is essentially bisexual. Most people are in some way attracted to people of their own sex, but social constraints, varying with culture and historical period, repress these impulses. The dandy represents a release from such constraints. In several of Shakespeare's plays, a young girl, back then the female roles in the theater were actually played by male actors, has to go into disguise and dresses up as a boy, eliciting all kinds of sexual interest from men, who are later delighted to find out that the boy is actually a girl. Think, for example, of Rosalind in As You Like It. Entertainers such as Josephine Baker and Marlene Dietrich would dress up as men in their acts, making themselves wildly popular among men. Meanwhile, the slightly feminized male, the pretty boy, has always been seductive to women. Valentino embodied this quality. Elvis Presley had feminine features, the face, the hips, wore frilly pink shirts and eye makeup, and attracted the attention of women early on. The filmmaker Kenneth Anger said of Mick Jagger that it was a bisexual charm which constituted an important part of the attraction he had over young girls and which acted upon their unconscious. In Western culture, for centuries in fact, feminine beauty has been far more fetishized than male beauty, so it is understandable that a feminine-looking face like that of Montgomery Clift would have more seductive power than that of John Wayne. The dandy figure has a place in politics as well. John F. Kennedy was a strange mix of the masculine and feminine, virile in his toughness with the Russians and in his White House lawn football games, yet feminine in his graceful and dapper appearance. This ambiguity was a large part of his appeal. Do not be misled by the surface disapproval your dandy pose may elicit. Society may publicize its distrust of androgyny. In Christian theology, Satan is often represented as androgynous, but this conceals its fascination. What is most seductive is often what is most repressed. Learn a playful dandyism and you will become the magnet for people's dark, unrealized yearnings. The key to such power is ambiguity. In a society where the roles everyone plays are obvious, the refusal to conform to any standard will excite interest. Be both masculine and feminine, impudent and charming, subtle and outrageous. Let other people worry about being socially acceptable. Those types are a dime a dozen, and you are after a power greater than they can imagine.